His Angelic Keeper. Hidden. By Melinda Kusira. About his angelic keeper, hidden. Sovvan wants to save her mage-gifted brother from the demon bent on devouring his soul. But first, she needs to stop her ex-guardian angel from completing a spell that could destroy the repository of all memory and with it, the last 14 years of her strange existence. If only this bizarre band of creatures would stop kidnapping her, she could make a start on that. But those creatures have plans, and they won't take no for an answer. There's no rest for the dead, especially not for someone who's caught between angels and demons in a world where magic is real, and just using it can kill you. The afterlife is turning into more of an epic fantasy adventure than Sovvan expected. But one thing will never change. Family comes first. The His Angelic Keeper series is a humorous sword and sorcery series starring Sovvan from the Cursebreaker series. This is fantasy. His Angelic Keeper. Hidden speculates about how Christianity might express itself in a traditional epic fantasy world with its own pantheons of pagan gods and magic. Or it did until the characters hijacked the original story, His Angelic Keeper number 1, and changed the premise. They're in unexplored territory now. Enjoy the trip. Just stay away from the clockwork insects. They bite. Dedication. For Carolyn Kusira, 1984-2014. Rest in peace, sis. O guardian most dear, I'm lost and nowhere near the ones that I hold dear. O guardian most dear, help me stop the puppeteer before I disappear. O guardian most dear. Traditional share and prayer. A note from the other side. Hi readers. I'm back. I'm Sovvan, the ghost who might be turning into an angel. I still find that hard to believe. I'm also the hero of His Angelic Keeper, the first book in my Breakaway New series. When you last saw me, my guardian angel had fallen to the dark side. He also threw an agent of chaos at me, and it injected something into me when it bit me. Now I'm fading away, but the goddess of fate, I didn't know she was real, poked her nose in and reminded me about the apple she'd given me. It turns out that apple is a concentrated burst of creation, and it supposedly disrupts the agents of chaos's disintegrating effect. Who knew? That crab apple didn't come with instructions, so you'll forgive me for not knowing what to do with it, other than to pocket it. I'm still stuck on the fact that a goddess from a fallen pantheon is still wandering around. What's that all about? I have a sinking feeling I'm about to find out. Sovvan, sister of Sarn and guardian angel in training, fingers crossed. Chapter 1. I'm fading away. The blackness faded to a peculiar shade of gray Sovvan hated so much, and that grayness turned transparent. That was strange. But an agent of chaos had bitten her a little while ago, so maybe that was normal? Bits of her body peeled off in a slow-motion spray and grayed out. Like cinders on the wind they flew away, moving in time to that damned metallic clicking, which grew nearer, as Sovvan lay there semi-conscious on a branch in the grove of memory. This place stored the memories of those who died over the centuries. Sovvan still found that hard to believe. Something held her body and soul together. Perhaps it was the bond to her twin, Sarn. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. Beside her, Miss Raya froze, magical crabapple in hand. The red apple looked like any other ripe apple, just smaller. According to Faye, the ex-goddess of fate, it could reverse the effects of that bite. Miss Raya threw back her head and howled one word, no. Purple lightning danced over the angel's armor as it consumed her. I'm sorry, Sovvan. Your brother needs me. Miss Raya let go of the apple, and it fell on Sovvan's lap. Pick it up. It's the only way to fight whatever the agent of chaos did to you. But her hand wouldn't obey her, no matter how many commands Sovvan sent it. Instead, her hand lay limply on the waist-thick branch supporting her. The apple remained on her lap, doing nothing magical. It didn't even shine. Miss Raya vanished in an explosion of purple sparks. Great, now Sovvan was alone with her floating ex-guardian angel, who was working some sort of magic, but she didn't know what. Are you trying to summon your Dark Lord? He didn't answer, but what else could he be doing? Malachiah gathered more power to him, and it ringed him in an invisible cloud Sovvan could sense but not see. That power made her skin crawl and bile rise in her throat at the stench of death and decay in the air. His magic had a bad odor, or maybe that stench of burning garbage came from him. Below her, metal creatures skittered around the leaf-covered floor of the grove. They were the mysterious agents of chaos. What did they want? One had already bitten her, and the rest just massed there like an army of clockwork insects. What were they waiting for? Probably for me to fall off this branch. And Sovvan would too, since she was fading in and out of consciousness. Where would she end up when she finally blacked out? The gray between again? Sovvan didn't feel its pull, nor was she seeing gray anymore. A metallic insect crawled up her arm, across her shoulder, and finally up the side of her head. The clockwork roach stopped on the tip of her nose and regarded her with softly ticking eyes. Tiny black hands wound around its coin-shaped eyes, keeping time. Don't bite me. Once was enough. Sovvan stared at the creature until it became blurry. She closed her eyes. Before she could freak out too much, the link to her brother yanked Sovvan off the branch and dumped her onto a carpet of red leaves below. They must have cushioned her landing, because nothing hurt from the fall. What a relief! Something had finally gone her way. Sovvan ran a hand over those red leaves, crinkling them. Each five-pointed leaf stored someone's memories. Births, deaths, holidays, wars, all were recorded by these leaves, and one might have some information she could use. As Sovvan touched the leaves around her, a compulsive urge to absorb as much information as she could overtook her, and she grabbed handfuls of leaves. Fragments of conversations about historical events flashed through her mind as Sovvan reached for more leaves. One leaf had even saved an argument about the adversary. Sovvan paid attention to that one, because her ex-guardian angel had tried to hand her over to that creep. She needed to find out as much as possible about him, in case he showed up here. Sovvan couldn't rule anything out at this point. Only Malachiah knew what his spell would do when he completed it. None of the memories that had been stored in the leaves within reach provided any answers about that spell, or the army of tiny clockwork insects marching toward her. Damn. Someone must have encountered them in the past, and their memories must be here, somewhere. Hers were too, but there were billions of leaves to search through. Which ones held the information she needed? Not the ones she'd landed on. Damn it. Oh well, the answers only fell into the hero's lap in stories. Sovvan put all thoughts of reclaiming her lost memories out of mind for now. The memory eaters had just been doing their job when they'd taken them. She had larger problems than the holes in her recollections. I've wasted enough time. Sovvan let go of the spent leaves and they slipped, gray and lifeless, through her hands to land on their red brethren. Sovvan blinked as those leaves blurred. She fought to keep her eyes open, as two people whispered about chaos and order and agents who tried to maintain some sort of balance between the two. But there was no one else here except her, and the trees and the clockwork creatures coming toward her. Numbness crept up her body. Those whispers must have come from the many memories she'd absorbed. That sounds like something Miss Raya would drone on about, Sovvan said to the voices arguing in her head. What are the odds I'd land on the handful of memories about some old debate about those two arcane powers? Too small for fate not to have played a role in that. Too bad Sovvan wasn't aware enough to pay attention to those fading voices. Hopefully, those memories would become information she could access later when she wasn't so damned tired. The memory trees shivered in the increasing wind from whatever Malachi was doing. Was it too much to hope the god Misraya served would smite her ex-guardian angel? Probably, unless fate lent a hand. Fate. Fate, that ex-goddess had given her something. An apple. Sovvan forced her eyes open. Of course that crab apple was still rolling away from her. A spent leaf fell from her numb fingers as she willed her hand to reach for that beautiful apple. It might cure her of whatever the agent of chaos had injected into her, if she could just grab that apple before it rolled out of reach. But her arm refused to obey her. Shades, fades and blades. Why is no one ever around when I need help? Sovvan blinked away the gray edging her vision. So the gray between was coming to collect her again. Not good, unless the portal to this place was still in there. But Sovvan couldn't remember where the only memory eater who was on her side had created that portal. Everywhere in the gray between pretty much looked the same as everywhere else except for the forest, but Four hadn't made the portal near there. Hopefully, that portal will be visible from a long way off on that gray plain. But it probably wouldn't be, because her luck was never that good. Worry about that later. Right now, you need to get that apple. Sovvan tried to move her legs, but they wouldn't obey her either. Damn, and Misraya was gone. Red, the guardian angel of this place, was still unconscious, and only God knew what had happened to Four. That memory-eating pachyderm had vanished before the fight with Malachi. This can't be the end. Sovvan railed against that. But her very being was slowly unraveling into white glowing strings. How strange. What did that agent of chaos do to me? Sovvan stared at her disappearing hands. Did they want Malachi to win? Sovvan could still raise her head, so she checked her feet, but they were gone, taking with them the dull throbbing pain from kicking a certain ex-guardian angel, and her ankles and calves were unraveling too. As Sovvan watched her unmaking, part of her detached from her body and floated upward past the red and white blur crawling toward her. What on earth was that? Get the apple, Faye shouted from somewhere nearby. Was that ex-goddess back again? I thought she couldn't manifest without throwing things seriously out of whack. Though maybe that restriction had been lifted, since things were pretty screwed up right now. Sovvan glanced around for that ex-goddess, but everything had become blurry and indistinct. Maybe Faye had appeared on a leaf again. But everything was fading to that hateful shade of gray, as Sovvan floated up into the roiling sky above. What's happening to me? Since she was already dead, Sovvan couldn't die again. But what did that leave? What happened to souls that unraveled? Was there one last reprieve? Or was the darkness sweeping her consciousness away from the last thing she would ever see? I'm sorry, bro. I'm sorry I couldn't save you or your son. I wish I'd met him. But now Sovvan might never do that, not if this final darkness was it for her. She mustered all the energy she had left for one last prayer. Forgive me, O Lord. Send me back. I'll get things right this time. I just need one more chance. But if the god Misraya believed so heartily in her, he gave no sign. The darkness consumed her mind, snuffing out its light for a while. Sovvan dissolved into a cloud of shimmering motes and floated out of the grove of memory and back to the gray between, the crossroads of the afterlife where all souls were sorted. The shining cloud that had been Sovvan descended in a shower of sparks onto a foggy hill. Gray light filtered through a break in the thunderheads, and it shined on the metal carapaces of the clockwork beetles crawling up that hill. They each grabbed pieces of the entity that had been Sovvan and pushed them together, reassembling her. More clockwork insects scurried about, until a ghost of a girl lay on the brow of that hill. Her dark hair and white skirt blew in the wind, whipping across the plain. Job done, those insects scuttled away and a fog bank chased them. It rolled over Sovvan, hiding her from view as she stirred. Chapter 2. Get that apple. As Faye stared at the flame flickering on her palm, an image of Sovvan appeared in its heart finally. Thank you, God. Because she'd tried to find out what had happened to that girl a few times since she'd broken the connection. Time moved slowly in the afterlife, but it did move. Unfortunately, no one else had. The scene looked the same as it had the last time Faye had checked it. Sovvan still lay on a branch, her dark hair and white robes waving in the breeze like she was some kind of damsel in a bard's tale. White wasn't a good color for Sovvan, not even with the wide purple hem and edging on the sleeves. It washed the girl out, and made her look even more pale and pathetic when Sovvan was anything but. Faye fought the urge to roll her eyes. Sovvan was no damsel in distress. She was far too plucky for that, but where was that pluck now? Come on, girl. Get up. This isn't the time to lay about. While Sovvan did nothing to save herself, her ex-guardian angel cast a spell Faye didn't recognize. Why was that girl just lying there? Wake up. But Sovvan didn't. Why not? What am I missing? Faye poked the flame, but nothing happened because she was impervious to fire. Something must be preventing Sovvan from waking up. Could the agent of chaos do that? Faye reviewed what little she knew of those creatures, then shook her head. No, her gut said something else was going on. Come on, girl, wake up. I gave you a reprieve. Not something the old goddess of fate would have done, but Phaedrison wasn't that woman anymore. She technically wasn't a goddess anymore, and hadn't been for a millennium or two, not since the last uprising, when she'd pledged herself and her family to serve the Father of all creation. He should have smote us from existence. It was his right to do that. But he hadn't. Instead, he'd accepted her service, reduced her power, which had been a relief, truth be told, but she would never admit that to anyone. After that, Faye had done what she could to uphold this tenuous balance thing. That last war had nearly broken it, and the world she'd lived in for years beyond counting. So keeping the balance was imperative for her family's survival, and Faye tended to eviscerate threats to that balance with extreme prejudice. Come on, girl. I gave you a get-out-of-trouble-free card, I mean apple. Use it. Why hadn't Miss Raya forced the apple she'd given Sovvan down that girl's throat? The cure wasn't a complicated ritual: bite, chew, swallow, and let the apple do its work. Why weren't they doing that? Do I have to do everything myself? Faye fought the urge to clench her fists. She didn't want to quench the flame or the future she was studying. It was sort of like scrying, except her fiery power rendered every image in red, orange, and gold. But the flame could only show her the immediate future, not the present, and not a damn thing happened there. What in blazes was that warrior angel doing? Communing with the soul she was supposed to be guarding? That would explain why Miss Raya knelt there with her head thrown back and her arms akimbo, but this wasn't the time for that. Unless her mortal was in danger. Was he? Faye held out her other hand and summoned another flame. Show me Sovvan's twin brother, Sarn. A flame shot out of her palm, but it didn't show a vision of his immediate future, just an image of a luminous silver tree shaking a branch at her in consternation. Faye laughed. She couldn't help it. Well, hello to you too, Your Majesty. Why are you trying to view his future? Asked the Queen of all Trees. Why are you hiding him? Faye poked the palm-sized image of Shiari's queen with her gift, just to see if that entity would give up any information, but no, the Queen of all Trees deflected that magical probe right back at her. Ouch. Faye smothered the flame that licked the sleeve of her favorite dress. It was a cream-colored silk sheath with dual slits, so she could run when one of her children called. The Queen of all Trees didn't answer. Well, that was fine. Faye knew where to find Sarn. He'd be somewhere under or around Mount Eredrin, since the promises he'd made wouldn't allow him to go far from there. "Who are you hiding him from? Is it just me or someone else?" Faye bet good money it wasn't her because she had no reason to harm him. No answer came, not that Faye had expected one. They were at a stalemate for now. "You know I could pop over and look, right? When he limited my powers, he didn't touch my ability to teleport at will." The Queen of All Trees nodded her glowing mushroom-shaped crown. "Interesting. You want me to flash over there, don't you?" Faye narrowed her eyes at the Queen's apparition. "Why? What is it you want me to see?" "Maybe something, maybe nothing. Only you can judge that." The Queen of All Trees raised and lowered her branches in a kind of shrug, then her image winked out. "How mysterious. What trouble are you in now, Sarn?" Faye searched through the immediate futures for him, just in case the Queen of All Trees had relaxed her guard. But she hadn't. Faye hadn't expected her to. Still, this all raised an interesting question. What the heck was going on in Shayari? Faye relaxed her muscles and let her mind wander down the fiery paths of the future, but they were tangled, and their images were too jumbled to make out. Sarn's future must be in flux. If so, then every decision he made would change it. Damn. If she couldn't use her powers to see what was going on, then she'd just have to visit Shayari. Well, why not do that now? It's not like she was getting any answers by sitting here. Faye snapped her fingers and a tongue of flame enveloped her. It wasn't a real flame, just the physical manifestation of her power. When the flames subsided, Faye stood on a balcony overlooking the river. "All right, Sarn, where are you?" "Not on this balcony, damn." Movement caught her attention. Faye choked down a lungful of the adversary's putrescence, as her red swirling eyes locked onto a woman in her early 30s. "What the hell's going on here? Something interesting?" Faye rubbed her hands together, anticipating the kind of drama she could sink her nails and maybe even her blade into. As she inhaled that stink again, she sifted through it, seeking information. Her mocha lips turned down in disgust. One of the adversary's lesser minions had been here less than a month ago, but not the big guy himself. Damn. Faye's ebony skin boiled as it thickened, and a dragon struggled to break free from her confining human form. Before all vestiges of her pretend humanity puddled on the floor with her fast shredding gown, Faye strengthened the glamour hiding her from view. Thankfully, she'd appeared on a balcony, and the next level up was about 40 feet overhead. Faye needed every foot of that space to calm down and reverse the change before she remodeled the exterior of the mountain stronghold and upset Shayari's Sylvan Queen. Like any other dragon, she had a horde, her descendants. When people messed with her kin, she eviscerated them. But the adversary was sealed out of this world, so rending him limb from limb was impossible for the moment. Faye sheathed her claws and didn't gouge the tiled floor. With an inaudible pop, her body shrank and cloaked her in a thin veneer of humanity. A snap of her fingers swapped her impractical skirt for her favorite suit of armor. Blood had stained her dragon-scale armor a deep red. Faye winked at her reflection, then her smile fell. The Blood Knight might be back in business, but her favorite damsel in distress, Ariadne the Pure, was gone. Squaring her shoulders, Faye packed away the grief for another time. Someday she'd find out what had happened to Ariadne and take her back, but not today. Her trusty sword sheathed itself at her hip as Faye approached her seated descendant. Inari didn't know she had a goddess as an ancestor, nor was Faye about to inform her. Only the first 4 generations out needed such intel to deal with the side effects of their peculiar heritage. Once the percentage of godhood shrank to below 10%, it wasn't worth mentioning. Besides, Inari only had a drop of her blood. Any effect it had was so minor, no one would comment on it. But it did grant the girl an affinity for mages, and a magic-accepting physique. Both were great adaptations for a woman living in a country riddled with enchantments. So Inari continued reading, never noticing the goddess in her presence. Faye studied her. There was a mark all right, but it wasn't the adversary's. It was more like a piece of someone's magic had gotten caught in her descendant's chest. Since this unknown mage had life magic, it would help rather than harm, so it was safe enough to leave in place. Still, Faye disliked anyone marking up her descendants, however distant they might be. Sensing eyes on her, Faye glanced over her shoulder at the view. Right on cue, the queen of all trees appeared just beyond the outer circle of menhirs. Faye winked at the giant silver tree and vanished. But she didn't fly far before she felt the corruptive influence of the adversary and the slight tug of family. What have we here? A diversion? Faye drifted unseen toward a longship anchored in the tiny port, about a mile from the mountain. A woman paced the deck bearing both the adversary's mark and a drop of her blood. Faye floated there, her bare black hands on her blood-red hips as she considered what to do about this abomination, until a whisper interrupted her fuming. She's chosen her path. You can't change it. Of course I can. I am the final fate, the author of the future. Faye clenched her fists and glared at the hapless woman in her late 20s. What an utter fool she was to side with the abomination known as the adversary. Leave her be. Interference is forbidden. You know the rules. The queen of all trees was correct, much as Faye hated to admit it. Yeah, it's that whole free will thing, worst idea ever if you ask me. So who let that creep back in? Answer me that and I'll go in peace, for now. He's still locked out of this world. While the seal remains, he can only whisper. You're naive if you believe that. Faye flashed herself home without waiting for the Queen of All Trees' response. The adversary had targeted Shayari this time. Fine, let him try to break through there. Faye's home lay 1,000 miles as the dragon flies to the southwest. She had time to safeguard her horde, her family, from his corruptive influence. Claws pricked her fingertips, drawing blood as they parted her flesh. Faye raked them across a stone parapet, leaving a 6-foot gash behind. Smoke curled out of her nose. To the perfect blue sky overhead she roared, "You won't take any of mine this time, corruptor. I'll barbecue you if you try. And wouldn't that be a fine time?" Faye blinked at the sun-baked land of her home, and cursed as she leaned against the balustrade again. She'd gotten so caught up in her thoughts about the adversary and her many times great-granddaughters, she'd forgotten about Sarn. I bet you planned it that way, Queenie. You knew I'd take the bait, and that my powers don't allow me to flash myself under mountains. Well, not without a stop on the side of that mountain first to orient herself. She could flash herself back, but what would be the point? Faye didn't know where to find Sarn, and the thought of heading underground to search for him sent a shudder through her. No, he'd resurface eventually, and that was soon enough to find him. Besides, the Queen of All Trees hadn't looked all that worried about him, so he was probably fine. But his sister was another story. Faye conjured another flame. Show me Sovvan. That unconscious girl appeared in the heart of the flame, burning on her palm. Besides Sovvan, Miss Raya vanished into a purple blaze, leaving Sovvan alone as bit by bit that girl faded away. Where was that damned apple? Faye panned the view, but the flame guttered on her hand as Sovvan's future divided. Faye cursed. Damn, she had to wait for the girl's future to settle, so she could see something. Or she could stress the balance even further and just flash herself over there. Faye drummed her fingers on the balustrade. That idea had merit. Sitting about just wasn't her thing. Movement in the flame she was about to snuff out caught her eye, and Faye zoomed in on the red-haired angel gripping her head. She didn't know her name. There hadn't been time to ask when Faye had used a loophole to talk to Sovvan earlier. Maybe she didn't need to physically manifest to save Sovvan. Faye closed her eyes and sent part of herself to the grove of memory, as that angel sat up. Pissed. Over here. Faye waved from the flame she manifested in the grove of memory. Her fiery aura singed a few leaves, but Faye couldn't help that. It was her nature to burn things. But no information was ever truly lost anyway, so it didn't matter. Who said that? The angel gathered her red tresses into a messy bun as she glanced around. At least that got her long hair out of her way. Good girl. Faye approved of the change. Too many artists painted women warriors with long flowing hair riding into battle, which was totally impractical, not to mention dangerous. At least this angel understood that. Now, if she'd just find that apple and stuff it down Sovvan's throat, the two women could go stop Malachi from causing any more trouble. As if the red-haired angel had heard her thoughts, the angel's violet eyes landed on Sovvan, and she crawled toward the girl who was slowly unraveling. Hurry up. She hasn't got long, Faye urged. From her limited vantage, it was hard to tell if the angel had heard her. Red glanced in the wrong direction. Who said that? Never mind. I gave Sovvan a special apple. Find it and give it to her. Hurry up before she disappears. Force it down her throat if you have to. It should do its work the instant it was inside Sovvan. Faye had made certain of that when she'd given that apple to Sovvan in case the girl was incapacitated, and it was good she had. But she hadn't expected it to take so long to find out what had happened to that gift. That was part of the fun of a linear existence. But Sovvan was dead, and she was part angel now, so she might not experience time in a linear way. Something to keep in mind should they have a face-to-face meeting again. Faye made a mental note of that. What apple? What are you talking about? Red glanced around for Faye again, but the angel's gaze snagged on the ex-guardian angel who'd knocked her out, Malachi. Uh-oh. Red shifted from a sit to a crouch. Any second now, she'd spring into action. Red was a warrior, locked onto her opponent. Nothing Faye could say would change that. Damn it. No, get the apple. You can fight him after you save Sovvan. You need her to defeat him. Faye clenched her fists. Smoke poured from her lips again as the dragon inside her flexed its claws. Why did no one listen to her? Do I have to do everything myself? It was a rhetorical question because Red sprang into the air. Her wings snapped out and caught the wind whipping the trees. Red rode that gale, and it slingshot her at Malachi. Like that angel had a prayer of stopping him. Faye shook her head. Bolts of lightning shot out of the thunderheads, and they struck Malachi, powering him up, right before Red collided with him, mid-air. In a clinch, they tumbled, each struggling to get the upper hand. It looked like Red would win, but they rolled, and lightning struck her. Red seized as she fell, too disoriented to catch herself. Hopefully, it hadn't knocked her out again. Get the apple, Faye shouted as she lost Red in the trees. Their leaves were as red as that angel's hair, making it impossible to tell if that angel was still conscious or where she'd landed. At the base of one of those trees lay the apple in question. Faye cursed the angel for not listening to her as the flame she'd sent to the grove of memory winked out, taking her ability to communicate with it. No matter, Faye still had the flame bobbing on her palm, and it had a good view of Sovvan still, but that unconscious girl was still unraveling. If only that angel would return and give that damned apple to Sovvan, maybe she could rouse the girl and get her to take her own damned medicine. But the possible futures split and split again, shutting the window Faye was viewing Sovvan through, and replaced it with a confusing jumble of possibilities. One caught Faye's attention. She expanded it, and studied the wrinkly, floppy-eared pachyderm, known as a memory eater. It was the same one that had brought Sovvan here in the first place, the one called for. And therefore was, hiding in the lee of a tree, watching everything but doing nothing to help or hinder. It's time to pick a side, dearie. You can't keep standing on the sidelines while the memories you hold so dear are in danger of being lost forever. Faye considered the future she held in her hands. It was a small flame that had split off the one she'd been using as a far viewer. It had a low probability of coming true unless she nudged it along. But she'd have to be careful not to usurp that creature's free will. Doing so would stress the balance to its breaking point. That future grew less likely as the tree hid behind shuttered and branches fell. The pachyderm backed deeper into the grove. No, you're going the wrong way, Faye poked the flame, showing her this future. It was fading as the future it represented grew less likely by the second. There was only a slim chance it would come to pass, then even that faded, and so did the odds of that memory eater helping Sovvan. Damn. The flame winked out as that future did, and Sovvan's future vanished too, leaving nothing but smoke behind as the girl dissolved into a shining cloud of motes and disappeared. No. Faye pounded her fist on her thigh. She needed to rend something right now. Chapter 3. A Strange Offer. Sovvan opened her eyes, and was none too surprised to find she was back in the gray place where her afterlife had begun. She was a ghost again, and that evil fog bank was waiting for her. Translucent gray tentacles whipped about, hungry for her regained memories, as the main body of fog rolled over her. It pulled her down into its gray, amnesia-giving heart. Was there no escaping that vile stuff? The fog tore at her mind with 1,000 invisible hands, but this time, it didn't rip away chunks of her identity, like it had every other time she'd ended up on this gray plane. Hadn't Four said something about that? Yes, that pachyderm had claimed the fog wouldn't affect her anymore because she no longer belonged in the gray between. Then why do I keep ending up here? Sovvan rose and dusted her robe off. It was still white and trimmed in purple, not her favorite color scheme, but it was keeping her modesty intact, even though she was transparent again. Still, she should get away from that fog in case Four had lied to her. Sovvan aimed for a spot where the fog was thinnest, and limped toward it. Hopefully, it would get her clear of this colloidal wall of forgetfulness, so she could figure out how the hell she'd gotten here and what to do next. Sovvan gritted her teeth as pain sank hot needles into her foot at every step, but she broke through the fog and halted in front of the giant mechanized roach, rising up on its hind legs so it could look her in the eye. Thousands of tiny clockwork roaches formed its body, transforming them into a super agent of chaos. Who knew they could do that? Sovvan backpedaled in alarm. What do you want? The super agent of chaos fixed white eyes ringed by symbols on her. 2 lines swung around inside its eerie eyes, marking time. I want what you want. Change. Of course it did. It was an agent of chaos, so that was a given. Why do you want that? Sovvan held her ground. The creature rubbed its upper pair of legs together, and steel grated against steel. It's in my nature. It's in yours too, rule breaker. She should have figured that out for herself. Sovvan touched the link to her brother, then let her hand fall back to her side. As much as she wanted to check on him, she couldn't help him, not while her ex-guardian angel was in that grove of memory trees. Sovvan didn't know what would happen if he destroyed that place, but she doubted it would be anything good. If it wasn't to talk, then why did you bring me here? The agent of chaos pointed to the gnarled forest at the edge of the foggy plain. Changes come and changes go, but free will drives them. It does not drive that. The clockwork roach quivered in anger as it pointed, not at the woods as Sovvan had first thought, but at a dark smudge at the forest's edge. A man-shaped shadow scuttled toward the forest. It reminded her of that sickly angel in Eversong, but it couldn't be the same disheveled angel she'd encountered before. That was impossible, wasn't it? Sovvan squinted into the gloom. No, it wasn't. What had that dragon said? Something about how angels could come and go at will from that city of purple spires. Sovvan didn't want to check it out, but she had to because there was a drop of eternity in that forest. If that dark thing found it, it could enter the living world and endanger her brother and nephew, and that was unacceptable. They were already in enough trouble. Hold on, bro. Besides, that thing was the reason the agents of chaos had brought her here. They could still destroy her, even if she did their bidding. Sovvan started toward that shadow, then stopped. Were the agents of chaos the bad guys? Four had all but called them the enemy. Where was that pachyderm anyway? Had Four returned to the gray between like she had? Probably. That memory eater could come and go at will here. But there was no sign of Four or any of her amnesian brethren, just that drifting fog. But it stayed away from Sovvan and the agents of chaos. Very interesting, so much so, Sovvan couldn't look away from it. Everything blurred as she stared into that fog. Was it inside her now, gobbling up her memories? How would she know if it was? Sovvan rubbed her eyes to clear them, but that didn't help. Everything was still blurry, until a loud metallic click startled her. Sovvan spun on her good foot, the one that wasn't hurting. Why am I here? Sovvan stared at the foggy plain. I was just doing something important, before. Before what? What had she been doing? How had she hurt her foot? Sovvan pressed her hands to her aching head. Why can't I remember? Because that fog had stolen her memories again. Damn it! Sovvan let her arms drop to her sides and gasped when someone spoke from behind her. She turned and stared at the clockwork creature. The upright metal cockroach lifted two of its upper limbs in a shrug. There's nothing to remember. You're here to deal with that. The super agent of chaos pointed at a gray man-shaped smudge, slouching toward a gnarled forest. Those trees looked familiar. Wasn't there a pool hidden in a glade somewhere inside that forest? Yes, there was, and she'd used it to visit someone. Who? Sovvan toyed with the links of a glowing chain protruding from her heart as she studied the forest and the mysterious entity stealing toward it. Who is that? And what was she up against if she ran over and challenged it? Because Sovvan was considering doing just that. Maybe that shadow had the answers she sought. He has no light to give this place, only darkness. Will you let him spread it over the living world? The roach tilted his head back to observe the stormy sky, and Sovvan copied him. She stiffened as the black clouds gathered in the distance. As she stared at them, pain pierced her brow. Sovvan touched her forehead gingerly to check for a wound, but there was none. When she looked away from those ominous clouds, the pain receded. What is that thing? The end of all things. Even the agent of chaos sounded unhappy about that. Maybe it wasn't the enemy after all. Why had she thought it was? Sovvan toyed with her heart chain, unable to recall where that idea had come from. You brought me here to stop it? Yes. The agent of chaos grabbed the glowing chain protruding from her heart, and probably her soul too, and flung her at the forest and the disappearing shadow. Chapter 4 Don't Interfere. Mom, what are you doing? Asked her son Phaedra, startling Faye. Nothing you need to worry about. Faye didn't look away from the flame she was feeding with her will. It danced on her upturned hand, casting orange light on her dark face. Faye kept her gaze on that fire instead of her son. She didn't want to see what he was wearing this time. His taste in clothes tended toward the offensive, and she had more important things to do than police that. Then why do you look so upset? As Phaedra approached, his shadow slid over the wide balustrade Faye sat cross-legged on. I lost someone and I need to find her. Faye scanned the possible futures but couldn't find Sovvan. Where was that girl? Why didn't she have a future anymore? She must be here somewhere. Sovvan couldn't be gone. That girl could not end like that. Oh no, there'd be no fade to black for Sovvan, not until she defeated her ex-guardian angel. That was one fight Faye had been looking forward to watching. Her inner dragon whipped its tail about as Faye searched the future again. Mom, could you just tear yourself away from those flames for a moment? I need to talk to you. Phaedra's shadow shifted restively in her peripheral vision. What's so important? Faye growled. Smoke leaked out of her mocha lips and fire tickled her tongue. Her dragon was too near the surface. Stress always did that to her. Faye didn't like losing people, especially this girl. Sovvan was too special to get lost in the future's inconstant fire, but maybe she could spare a moment from that search for her son. The sun smiled down on them from its cerulean throne in the cloudless sky. As its hot rays kissed the ridge to her left, the desert oasis she'd called home for most of her existence spread out in a golden expanse of rolling dunes and smoking mountains. Shadows moved about the valley's floor. Were they the reason Phaedra had sought her out? Faye pulled on her dragon senses. Perhaps she ought to find out. It had been a long time since war had come to her home. Had it come again? Since her home lay in a sheltered valley in the ring of fire, all the mountains were active volcanoes, and only the brave or the stupid would dare cross them. Which was it this time? When she scanned, all she found were her children, grandchildren, and numerous other descendants and their families. No strange hearts beat in her valley. Neither the adversary nor his goons had come here yet. Mom? Phaedra asked again. This time, he let his impatience seep into his voice. What? Faye roared. Her inner eye scanned a network of ruby lines covering each peak. Her children tended them, ensuring they funneled that geothermal heat to those who needed it. Phaedra was supposed to be up there, not bothering her. Put the dragon away. I'm not talking to you while you're like this. Phaedra's shadow folded his arms over his chest. Maybe he had a point. Faye shoved her dragon down. Why aren't you supervising your brothers and sisters? Expanding the Ehrenbosch line was your idea. Faye gestured to the tiny figures on the distant mountainside. Their silhouettes were just visible against the red glow of the spells, spider webbing the peak. They channeled the volcano's destructive power into other uses while still allowing the occasional eruption, but in a controlled manner, so it was more beautiful than destructive. Fans handling it. He didn't want me along. Phaedra shrugged. But he was 4,000 years old, and he'd had plenty of practice at hiding his true feelings about his exclusion. He also knew better than to hide anything from her. Faye studied her son for a moment more. Phaedra looked about 30, and he stood as tall and as proud as the desert king she'd betted to beget him. He had the same strong jaw and high cheekbones, and an aura of confidence enfolded her beautiful son like a king's mantle. Faye sighed. His father, she'd forgotten his name, had been that way too, a tall black warrior best taken straight up, and she had, right behind the throne. No foreplay, just a quick in and out before he'd addressed his squabbling nobles about something. Then she'd sauntered off into the sunset and vanished. Phaedra's father had likely never given her another thought, nor had he ever discovered she'd borne a son. Faye smiled at the memory. I was so brash in those days. But it had been such fun to put one over on that masochistic little king. It had been her private joke on the man, and the system that had oppressed women under his rule. Faye felt Phaedra's gaze on her, and she snapped out of her reverie. Why did you interrupt me? Phaedra didn't answer, so she concentrated on the fire dancing on her palm. It had been guttering before she turned the full force of her will on it. Faye fed it a little power, and the flame flared up as images swirled in its heart. Show me the girl called Sovvan. The fire leaned away from her, as another angel appeared in it. This new angel lay in state on a rose-strewn bier like some sleeping princess from an old bard's tale, but she was the wrong angel. Damn. No amount of pushing or prodding could budge this angel's likeness from the future Faye viewed. She crushed the flame and ignited another one with her will. Show me Sovvan. The sleeping angel reappeared in the heart of that fire, and a metallic insect crawled across her stone bier until a claw swatted it away. The image faded, leaving the fire empty of prophecy. What was that all about? What had she seen? Faye stared at that now empty fire as it guttered in the wind. What part do you play in all this? She wondered about the insect and the angel. I just need a moment of your time. Fedra tried again, but his calm was cracking just as hers was. Patience wasn't a family trait. Unless someone's dying, can whatever you want wait for another hour? Faye asked. Since he was in no hurry to expound on his reason for tracking her down, it probably could wait until tomorrow or the next day at the very least. Come on. Show me the angel girl Sovvan. Faye gave the flame another mental prod. The images churned but couldn't clarify into a recognizable image. Which meant one of two things: the entity known as Sovvan didn't exist anymore, or things were still so stirred up that even her sight couldn't break through the interference to see what was going on. Neither were pleasing prospects, but at least the latter possibility offered some hope that angelic girl could pull off a miracle. But she'll need help. Faye tapped her fingers on her thigh. Who could she get to help her, assuming Sovvan still existed somewhere? I could give someone a nudge. But who? Are you sure that's a good idea? You're not subtle, Mom. Caution. From Fedra? Oh, that was rich. My, how things have changed. But her eldest living son surfed the timelines often enough that he may have seen this already. His powers were awesome, even with the restrictions she'd placed on them. But you won't, said a new male voice, just as resonant as her son's. I thought you were going to let me announce you, Fedra said to JC, and his shadow shook his head. I was, but it's a fine day for a walk. Another shadow stopped beside her son and shrugged. A cross peeked over his shoulder, and its shadow lengthened as it fell over Faye. Faye looked from the flame guttering on her hand to her visitors. Fedra was wearing a floral ensemble in orange and yellow. He looked festive and appropriate to this time and place. That was a nice change. Maybe he'd heeded her last warning on that matter. But Faye found that hard to believe. Fedra waved a hand at his clothes. This was Flair's idea, not mine. I'm modeling it because we're the same height, and he needed to pin up the hem. Indeed, a neat row of pins lined the hem. Yes, Flair was a bit of a clotheshorse. As one of her many middle children, her gender-fluid son had found a way to distinguish himself from his siblings through clothes, and what a skilled tailor he was. I like the color scheme. It's like wearing a sunset, JC said, and his gaze was as appreciative as his tone. The Son of Man's white robes looked a bit dusty and travel-worn in comparison, and his sandal ties were frayed in places. I'm sure Flair can whip you up one if you give him your dimensions. I would like that, but my aura will bleach it to white because that's how mortals think of me, always garbed in white and light. JC picked at his white robes. Oh well, that explained the sad state of his sandals. For a man who did as much walking as he did, such worn-down soles must chafe horribly and leave blisters. But he would look splendid in bright colors. His dark complexion and rugged features cried out for proper adornment. Too bad, I'll pass on your praise and leave you two alone to talk. Fedra bowed, then fled the roof for the stairs, leading down into the desert fortress. His bare feet barely made a sound on the pale limestone. I want to help her, but you're here to forbid that, aren't you? Faye held up her hand and the flame grew. But it didn't show Sovvan's immediate future. She still exists somewhere, but she's veiled from my sight, right? Are you hiding her? One glance assured Faye he wasn't. That wasn't his style. If not you, then. Oh no. Please tell me it's not the adversary. Faye had smelled him in the air over Mount Eredrin, but JC probably knew that already. That mountain was his next stop. Not by him. He's not powerful enough yet to veil anyone. No, someone else is hiding her from my sight too. JC rubbed his brow as if that could clear his vision. He was as disturbed as she was about that development. But she's out there, right? Faye crushed the flame in her hand, snuffing it out. Yes, hopefully, she's doing what she does best, making trouble for the enemy. JC shaded his eyes from the sun. But we know where she'll go. If she hasn't already, she'll find a way to reach her brother. Faye summoned a flame. Show me the mage called Sarn. Before it could form an image of him, JC's hand covered hers and snuffed out the flame. Don't. If you look at him, you could draw attention to him. Let his fate stay unseen by all. JC retracted his hand, giving her space. Though the flames couldn't hurt him. No elementally derived magic could. Good point, Faye conceded. There were other ways to find out what Sarn was up to. I want to help them both. But doing so will stress the balance you're carrying, won't it? She looked up at JC. He towered over her, but he didn't make her feel small, even though she was. Yes. JC slumped onto the coping beside her. His cross weighed him down. Faye fought the urge to reach out and take some of its weight. She couldn't, no matter how much it hurt her heart to see him like that. But by the covenants he'd forged between mankind and his father, he must carry it alone. In his tired face, she saw hints of his dear mother. Memories stirred of a night flight through the desert, and a miraculous birth in a stable of all places. Faye pushed those memories down. That was a long time ago. Both the mother and child had survived. The latter sat across from her, watching her with unfathomable eyes. He was the reason she'd changed sides, given up her godhood, and fought to dismantle the old pantheons. He was love's pure light in a world that so badly needed it. She's been through so much. Surely the balance won't be upset if I give her a tiny push in the right direction. All her motherly instincts cried out for Faye to help, but first, she had to find out what had happened to Sovvan, and why she couldn't see her anymore. She's not your child, nor is she even related to you. But Sovvan was some woman's child, and not helping felt wrong on so many levels. Sovvan was a woman in danger. And we women need to stick together. Faye felt her talons prick her fingertips, but she retracted them before they could punch through her skin and scratch the limestone again. JC stared off at the distant horizon for a long moment, then shook his head. I wish that were the case, but she must succeed or fail on her own. Because like her twin, she's a loophole, right? The adversary's henchman screwed up, and instead of corrupting a soul into a powerful weapon to aim at heaven, he created a force for good. That was fitting on so many levels, but Faye refrained from pointing that out. Instead, she tucked her pale divided skirt under her thighs, so the hot wind from the south couldn't play with it. Only time will tell how she'll affect things. JC adjusted the cross leaning against his shoulder, and it faded from sight. But you have high hopes. Faye squeezed his hand, then released it. Yes, I do, for them and for us all. JC rose, but he stood a little straighter, and perhaps his cross was just a bit lighter than before. You don't trust me? Faye folded her arms. She'd done nothing to warrant that, and everything to curb her desire to interfere. Faye respected free will and always had. But there were times when bending it saved a great many more people than letting free will take its course. She might have given it a little push a time or two. I do, or I wouldn't be here. For my hopes to come to pass, they must be allowed to act as their hearts dictate. JC clasped his hands in prayer. By they he meant the twin loopholes, Sarn and Sovvan. Faye approved of the alliteration. But she was fond of alliterative names for her offspring. And they will act without interference. Faye grimaced, already hating that word interference. It encompassed too much in her opinion, and left her too little wiggle room. But where there was one loophole, there must be another. Faye just had to find it. Yes. Even the smallest boon could draw the adversary's eye to her. JC glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Damn. He knew what she was thinking. Faye could see where this was going. And she's nowhere near ready for that. JC had fallen silent, and sweat had broken out on his brow. He leaned against the parapet, as if it alone held him up. A wooden cross materialized behind him, and a crown of thorns pierced his brow as she hurried to his side. Something bad was happening right now. Faye felt it in her bones, and she itched to call up a flame and find out what. But JC captured her glowing hands, as a million voices cried out for mercy. Chapter 5. Sometimes I whisper. Oof. Sovvan landed in a heap at the base of a twisted tree. She righted herself slowly as she searched for new bruises. But she found none, so she sat up. Sister, a man whispered. Sovvan had the feeling that word applied to her somehow. Damn this place and its penchant for eating her memories. It had done it again, putting her at a disadvantage. How did I get them back last time? No ideas sprang immediately to mind. Double damn. But the chain in her hands vibrated, reminding Sovvan of its presence. It glowed green, the same shade as his eyes. A vision popped into her head of a young man in his early 20s with fiery green eyes and a sharper version of her features. Sarn. That was his nickname, but not the name her twin brother had been born with. At least she'd remembered him. That was a step in the right direction. Are you at the other end of this? Sovvan squeezed the chain. Yes, was the quiet reply, and that felt right. Because we are one. Sovvan let the glowing link slide through her hands while a mile away, the man-sized clockwork roach spread its forelimbs and shook, throwing tiny versions of itself onto the gray ground. The low dunes in the distance shivered in time to that disassembling creature. Millions of tiny clockwork roaches burrowed out of them and marched toward her. Oh my God! Sovvan grabbed the nearest branch and pulled herself up. Amnesia be damned. It was time to get out of there. Her foot still ached from whatever she was doing before the agents of chaos had thrown her. But she limped between two bent and twisted trees into the forest anyway, toward her only means of escape. Where's an angel with a flaming sword when you need one? Sovvan muttered under her breath as she shoved branches out of her way. They swung back the instant she let go and smacked her back. Ouch. There was no need for that. Sovvan kept forcing a path through the forest until she couldn't. Branches thicker than her legs wove between the trees, blocking the way. When she pushed on them, they didn't budge. Damn it. Sovvan shoved her hair out of her eyes. It was gray like the rest of her, instead of its usual brown, because that was what this place did. It leached all the light and color from everyone who entered it. Since that was nothing to panic about, Sovvan searched for a way through the thick tangle of branches in front of her. Hopefully, she was heading toward the drop of eternity, not away from it. That damned fog rolled in as Sovvan glanced over her shoulder to check on the progress of the clockwork creatures, but the fog hid them from sight. She couldn't tell how close they were now. But she heard the clicking of their legs and the ticking of their clockwork eyes and knew they were still headed her way. Why were they following her? That forgetful fog had to roll over her too, hiding the exposed roots she was negotiating. One of them caught her foot, and Sovvan fell to her knees in front of a gap just her size between two trees. She crawled between them into that awful fog. It was a gray veil obscuring everything, including the trees she was squeezing between. You did this, a male voice said when Sovvan gained her feet in what must be a small clearing. He was probably a memory eater. That would explain the fog. You brought that army of insects down on us. I did no such thing. Sovvan chopped her hands through the fog in a vain attempt to dispel it. Their leader brought me here. At least that was her theory, but she had no memories to back that up. Why would they want you? You're nothing but a troublemaker, said another memory eater. This one was female and not one of her fans, judging by her acerbic tone. When Sovvan didn't reply, the memory eaters quit puffing out that amnesia-causing smoke they were so fond of. As the fog drifted on the wind, it thinned enough for Sovvan to look at each of the 4 memory eaters in their liquid eyes. They'd surrounded her. No surprise there. Their trunks were poised to blast her with more memory-erasing smoke if she didn't cooperate. No thank you. She had enough questions and missing memories to last a lifetime. Thanks for lifting the fog. Did I mention how much I like seeing? Because I do. Sovvan folded her arms over her chest. Answer the question. The first pachyderm stamped his foot, and the ground rumbled under Sovvan. The agent of chaos brought me here to stop someone, but I lost that person in the fog you generated. Sovvan gestured to the remnants of the fog curling around her legs. Hopefully, that shadowy person hadn't found what he was looking for yet. But he might have, since all the guardians of this place were currently interrogating her, instead of keeping undesirables out. I wish they'd keep me out. But no such luck there. Damn it. Even when Sovvan tried to play by the rules, she screwed everything up. I don't see anyone. I think you're making that up. The first memory eater glared at her. He had one thin gray line across his trunk, denoting him as one. For some reason, the memory eaters were into numerical names. It was just one more of their annoying quirks. I'm not. You can either stay out here and do whatever it is you do when you're not trying to steal my memories, or you can come with me to find this person. But she'd go to the drop of eternity. Sovvan gripped the luminous chain that linked her to her brother and squeezed between 2 pachyderms. I used that pool to visit him. He'd been in trouble then. Who knew how long ago that was? Time had no real meaning here, and it was impossible to tell its passage without a sun rising and setting, because the gray sky never changed. Nor did the clouds covering it ever do anything except hang out up there and depress everyone who looked at them. But she might be too late to help her brother. The memories of that fight were starting to come back, along with a sick feeling she'd forgotten something important. Sovvan bit her lip. She needed to remember what that something was. A curious tingling in her right foot dropped her gaze to it. Her toes glowed and bits of them drifted away as she watched. They left behind a latticework of light in the shape of her toes. That couldn't be good. Sovvan could only work on one problem at a time. The agents of chaos had brought her here to stop that shadow man from doing whatever he'd come here to do. So that was what she'd do. Then she'd save her brother and figure out what that important thing she'd forgotten was. Maybe that shadow man knew. Sovvan held her head high and stalked out of the clearing before any of those memory eaters could blast her with their amnesia-giving smoke. They still didn't believe her, but neither did they stop her. They probably didn't know what to do with her anymore. Well, that was fine with Sovvan. Maybe they'd leave her alone from now on. Sovvan wove between the twisted trees in the only forest in the gray between, as fast as she could hobble. If those memory eaters took to the sky on their wrinkly wings, they'd never find her in this press. Branches scratched her back and shoulders as she shoved them aside. They searched for something. A flash blinded Sovvan, and memories struck her hard, driving her to her knees. Miss Raya's strange disappearance, the interrupted fight with Malachiah, the bite, the apple Faye had given her, the grove of memory. Oh God, with her gone and its angelic protector knocked out, there was no one to protect that place and its store of information. Sovvan covered her face. She had to go back, but how could she get back to that grove? The branches that had been clawing at her back now bent away from her, as a pair of snowy wings draped over her shoulders like a feathered cloak. My wings are back. Sovvan gloried in the feeling of freedom that came with them. Maybe she could fly back. Dark hair fell into her eyes, confirming she was no longer a ghost. She was back to her hybrid state again, but she was still fading. Glowing bits peeled off her fingers and arms and floated away, eroding her skin. Whatever the agents of chaos had done to bring her here had a time limit. I still need that apple. But it was back in that grove of memory, and she didn't know how to get there from here. You're welcome, said a male voice she didn't recognize. Sovvan let her hands fall away from her face, but she didn't see who'd spoken. Thank you for releasing them. Not that she could use her wings in this press. Trees stood bowl to bowl around her, walling off the shore. She turned to face the pool and her interlocutor. Everyone should be free to decide their own fate. That was the sort of thing Faye, the former goddess of fate, would say, but this man in black robes was not her, nor was he affiliated with her in any way. His aspect was too dark to be associated with that fiery goddess. Who are you? Sovvan limped to the edge of the pool, but kept a man's length between her and the stranger. She'd been brought here to stop him, but so far he was just standing there at the water's edge doing nothing threatening. No one you would know. He peered into the pool, but a deep hood shaded his face. Okay, so he wanted to keep his identity a secret. Sovvan could respect that since her own brother also favored deep hoods, but Sarn's eyes glowed, rendering the whole cowl thing irrelevant. This man's eyes seemed to drink in the shadows, shrouding the pool. Sovvan hugged herself. Something was very wrong with this man, and it wasn't just that he was transparent. Rocks poked through his worn leather boots as he waited for something. Why did you come here? That seemed safer than asking where he'd come from. Sovvan was quite sure she didn't want to know the answer to that question. Not until she had the proper context, because he wasn't going to say Eversong or the Dead City. But where else was there in this crazy afterlife? He gazed into the pool. His hands were still clasped behind him, mirroring her pose, and that should have rendered him none threatening in her mind, but it didn't. His hands were gray and tipped with short, sharp metallic claws. I often come here. The living world is full of such beauty, isn't it? Yes, it was, but Sovvan had the disquieting feeling he came to do more than look. He squatted down, and she felt his eyes on her, assessing her. I'm just a harmless young woman with wings. I know nothing. I'm nothing special, she thought as a shadow passed through her. Was he reading her mind? Sovvan blanked it of everything but simple curiosity. Hopefully, her youthful demeanor would weigh in her favor. He nodded at what he found. Nothing to concern him. Good. He gestured for her to come closer. Like that was going to happen. She wasn't that naive. Sovvan stayed put, but she made sure to keep all her weight on her good foot. Maybe he'd chalk her reticence up to her bum foot. Although, it was paining her less and less as she stood within jumping distance of that drop of eternity. Its stillness called to her. Voices whispered in the back of her mind. Sovvan recognized one as her brother's. The other must be his son's. They spoke too low for her to make out what they were saying, and that annoyed her. If you're going to talk in my head, could you at least do it loudly enough so I can hear you? Of course there was no response, just more unintelligible whispers. They proliferated as that creepy guy stood by the water. Want to know a secret? The shadows veiling the robed man's face deepened until there was nothing but an impenetrable black oval where his face should be. Sovvan suppressed a shudder and pasted a curious expression on her face. At least she hoped that's how she looked. "Sure, I like secrets," she said a tad too brightly. "I thought you might." Sovvan felt his smile but couldn't see it in the darkness shrouding him. Shadows converged on him. That darkness must be the visible portion of his power. She stood in the presence of pure evil. Sovvan fought the urge to run away. "What's your secret?" "Sometimes I whisper and watch the ripples my voice makes. Would you like to see them?" He held out a gloved hand to her that was far more solid than the rest of him. Was he gaining solidity and possibly strength from her fear? If so, then that must stop right now. Sovvan stiffened her spine. She must brazen this out. Everything had led her here at this precise time to face this being of unknown power and purpose, and she wouldn't blow it. "I'd like to see that. If you'd care to demonstrate," Sovvan said when she was sure her voice wouldn't quaver. God, she hoped she wasn't making a mistake. "I would, since you, my dear, and your wayward guardian angel, made this all possible." He laughed, then leaned in close to the water until his shrouded face was just a hair's breadth from the still water. "Come, sinners, thy time is nigh. Fly to your Father. Together we rise." The water vibrated in time with his chant, and began to churn. Roots leapt out of the ground and dove for the laughing shadow in black robes, but they passed through him as if he wasn't there. All the while that chant reverberated, roughening the water. It kicked up silt from the pool's bottom, and that muck rose to the surface and formed a black downward-pointing star in a circle. If that wasn't a demon's mark, then Sovvan didn't know what was. Just a glimpse of it sent images of violence ricocheting through her head. She smelled blood and heard the screams and the crash of metal on metal in an endless war, one she was now part of for better or for worse. And that laughing man was the enemy, not Malachiah. No, her fallen guardian angel was just his pawn. "Well, I'm not. I'm no one's pawn." Sovvan had no weapons, just the one phrase that had stuck in her mind. The one Misriah had given her when she'd asked that contrary angel her name. Miserere nobis. Sovvan shouted as she charged, or rather limped, toward the man in black robes and straight into his trap. Chapter 6. The Agony of Fate. "Let me help her." The dragon in her soul bellowed, demanding to be let out. Faye clamped down on it, trapping its roar inside her when JC shook his head. "Please don't. If you interfere, you'll change things." His breaths came in painful pants as the cross bore down on him, and he struggled to stay on his feet. The knots in the sacred wood of his cross writhed as they changed into agonized faces, begging for help. "Because even stripped of much of my powers, I'm still the final fate." Faye pounded a fist on her chest. How she hated that title. She'd never wanted the job. Even though the pantheon that had forged her was long dead and dusted, that blighted curse still haunted her. "Yes," JC said so softly she almost didn't hear him. Maybe that was the dragon's doing. It was pacing inside her, demanding to be let out. It wanted to rampage. It wanted to burn. It wanted Armageddon. Well, it would just have to settle down because Faye didn't, and she was the master of that dragon. "I'll do as you ask. I'll sit this fight out." But Faye didn't like it, and if there was a way to act from a distance through someone else. Well, free will was a thing, and the adversary wasn't the only one who could whisper. "But I'm much more persuasive." "Miserere nobis." Sovvan shouted, proving she was indeed still a player in this game of good and evil, and her prayer echoed from the cross. JC gained strength from it and stood straighter. His cross shrank down to carry able proportions. "Your fight's coming. Just be patient for a little longer." He squeezed her free hand, then turned to go. Faye wiped away a tear for him. "Tell your mother it's been too long. We need to catch up." "She'd like that." JC smiled at her over his shoulder. Good, because I intend to pump her for information about this sleeping angel, unless you know something about her? All I have are rumors, but my gut says she's important. Faye just didn't know how or why, and the way things were going, she'd need both questions answered sooner rather than later, especially since that woman and her sect were bound up in some complicated way with what had happened to Sovvan. And I might have seen her in the future when I was looking for Sovvan. That was one more reason to find out more about that entity. She predates me. All I have are rumors about her too. Like you, I'm not omnipotent. JC shook his head and adjusted his cross. The crown of thorns had vanished, but blood still wept down his face. With her free hand, Faye removed a handkerchief from her sleeve and wiped the blood away. Would that she could so easily remove the wounds too, but she had no talent for healing flesh. Hearts yes, but not bodies. A wise decision. I don't regret dumping that insight. There's only one being who needs to know everything, and I'm not him. Faye stepped back, satisfied she'd made him a little more presentable in case his next stop was to see his mother. It probably wasn't, but no mother should see her child bloody like that. He pushed the cloth away and nodded his thanks. Nor am I, but I am part of him. I'm just not the omnipotent part. It makes relating to mortals easier if I don't know what they're about to do any more than they do. You were once mortal too. As his wounds so attested. Faye put her now bloody handkerchief away. When she looked up again, he was gone. Faye conjured another flame and swiped through a dizzying number of futures, looking for Sovvan, but that girl was still hidden. Who's hiding you and why? What are you doing, and why doesn't that entity want me to know? The dragon in her soul gnashed its teeth in frustration, and talons punched through her skin. Faye spun and raked the foot-thick balustrade with her 6-inch claws again. Mom? What? The question left her smoking lips as a roar. JC had left already, so Faye could let some of her dragon out now. Whoa. I'll come back later. Clearly this is a bad time. Fedra backed away and held his hands high to signal his surrender. Tiny flames danced in his frizzy black hair, and the dragon in her soul approved. It was a fire drake, after all. Why did you shave the top of your head but not the sides? You look like you're joining a religious order. Are you? Faye narrowed her molten eyes and studied him. He'd changed into a light-colored tunic and trousers, but the soot staining it made it hard to determine its original color. What? No, not that I have anything against that, since dozens of my sibs have joined such orders. But no, this, Fedra pointed to the shiny black bald spot on top of his head, is Fair's doing. He burped a fireball, and it burned off some of my hair. More than I'd realized. I guess I should shave off the rest until it grows back. Fedra rubbed his bald spot. His skin wasn't burned because of her family's immunity to fire, which didn't extend to hair or nails. But all other body parts were covered. Where's my baby? Faye snarled. Playing with what's left of his toys. I took the ones he slagged away. It was a rather impressive fireball. Fedra let his hand slide down his smooth face. So who's his daddy? I don't remember any of my other sibs belching fire at his tender age. His name is Nunya, as in none of your business. Faye snapped her fingers, and a tongue of flame enveloped her. When the flames receded, Faye was in another part of her fortress, in a nursery to be exact. A small child with her swirling red-gold eyes held a singed bear up to her. All her children had a variation of those eyes. Though for some it was more orange than others. Fix him, Mommy. A tear tracked down his golden-brown cheek. Her children were of every sentient race that had a male Faye could seduce, even the non-human ones. It only took one shag for a goddess of fate to get with child, and that was all she ever gave any man. Ah, honey, I can't. Mommy's better at rending things. Fixing them is not my forte. Faye retracted her claws and picked up her youngest child with ease, even though he was 3/4 of her 4 feet 11 stature. She didn't even need to pull on her dragon strength, but it was there, compacted into her petite form if she needed it. If only they'd let me rend things. Faye rubbed her son's back and walked out of the partially scorched nursery. Thank God it was just the textiles that had suffered. Marble had its benefits. She loved the sound of her claws clicking on it, and the brush of her son's curls against her chin as he laid his head on her shoulder. Mine, said the dragon that shared her soul. Yes, he is. Faye hugged her youngest son as she walked along a hallway lined with doors. They opened as she passed, and her children looked out. Their faces held only mild curiosity. A couple dared questions, but Faye shook her head. She wasn't in the mood to talk, not while ideas were percolating in her mind. If I can't help Sovvan, maybe one of my descendants can. After all, she had a lot of them, and they were scattered all over the world. Faye spun on her heel and faced the curious faces of her children. Spread the word to every branch of the family. Tell them to help the hybrid angel girl known as Sovvan. Faye juggled her son so he sat on her hip, thus freeing a hand. She extended it and conjured a flame on her palm. In its heart, she pulled up an image of Sovvan. This is her. Pass it on. Helping her is of the utmost importance, but I can't. The fire leapt from her hand to her daughter, Farala. Farala was in her firebird form, so the flame bobbed up and down on her head like a crown. But her fiery nature aside, she'd spread the word. Because of the balance? Phaedra suggested. Faye couldn't see which door he'd poked his head out of. Exactly, but where there's a will, there's a way. Faye turned and continued down the hall, holding her youngest child. He might also be the last. She was far, far older than any of her living children. But my will is iron. I will find a way to help Sovvan. I could help her. Phaedra caught up to her as Faye turned a bend. Faye shook her head. No, you couldn't. Nor can any first or second generation child of my blood, because you have too much of me in you, and I stress the balance. Does that mean I didn't inherit anything from my father? Phaedra eyed her. What was with this sudden curiosity about the man? No, not that it matters anymore because he's long dead. By your hand? No, I got what I wanted. I got you. Faye bumped her shoulder into her son's side, then let the flames of her power engulf her. She'd had enough of that conversation. In her arms, her baby purred. You like fire. Don't you? She kissed his button nose as he nodded. They reappeared elsewhere in the citadel she called home, and her heels clicked on the marble as she considered her next move. JC didn't say the Queen of all trees couldn't help Sovvan. And Sovvan was a woman in need. How could Shiari's fabled queen refuse? Faye smiled and rubbed her son's back. He yawned into her shoulder as she reviewed her idea. That could work, but I'll have to be sneaky about it. The dragon in her soul clicked its claws together in anticipation. It liked to be sneaky. This was one fight Faye couldn't sit out, not completely, not when another woman's child was in grave danger. Faye kissed the top of her son's head and hummed a lullaby as she all but skipped down the corridor. She'd just put her baby down for a nap, then she'd find Sovvan some powerful help. Chapter 7. What have I done? Sovvan crashed into that shadowy man and realized her mistake the moment the water closed over them. Oh God, how could I have been so easily tricked? He wrapped his long arms and legs around her, squeezing her tight. Shush, quiet girl. You're my ticket back to the living world. I don't know how you can come and go so freely, nor do I care. You're the loophole I've been waiting for. Sovvan thrashed in his grip, but she was fighting a shadow that slid away from every blow. His darkness wrapped tightly about her as the water vanished and air took its place. As had happened before, Sovvan slammed into a rainbow-hued shield. She lay there on her side for a moment before sliding along that transparent dome. "Don't let me in. Keep me out, I pray you." But as that wish formed in her mind, it was already too late. The shield thinned and Sovvan fell. The shadow detached itself from her and dove like a black arrow straight for the blue-green world, spinning below her. "No." Sovvan plummeted after him. But he'd vanished into that world, her brother's world. Oh God, what have I done? Where had that shadow man gone? She felt something tug on her heart. Sovvan glanced down at the glowing chain, disappearing into the clouds below her. Someone pulled its other end. "Sarn, are you all right, brother mine?" Had that faceless man gone after him? Sovvan grasped the chain of promises that bound them together heart to heart, and heaved with all her might. Her wings snapped out. But she didn't level off because she didn't know how to fly, or land, or do anything other than glide, since that didn't take much skill. If she kept her wings level and didn't move her body too much or too quickly, she shouldn't crash. At least Sovvan hoped not, as she reeled in the end of that chain. Everything would have worked out just fine if Sarn hadn't swung the damned chain. Sovvan wasn't corporeal enough to combat that, so she spun in a wide arc as she fell, until she figured out how to level off her dive. "Quit it, bro. I'm trying to fix the mess I accidentally made." Had that been an accident, though? The faceless man in black robes had been waiting for her. That agent of chaos set me up, and he took my memories. Sovvan had some of them back now, but did she have them all? Oh well, what was done could only be undone if she acted quickly. Sovvan pulled like her afterlife depended on it because it just might. Finally, she saw him. His hood had been blown back by the wind, exposing his face, and his annoyed glare made it clear he was not enjoying being dragged around by his deceased twin sister. "Well, that was too bad. I'm the oldest, so you must do what I say, and we need to talk, brother mine." Sovvan kept reeling him in. But there was something wrong with him. She must have pulled a tad too hard because his soul shot upwards and collided with her midair. Ouch. For a timeless moment they occupied the same space as two halves of the same person, then they split into two separate beings. Because that was what they were now. Sovvan tore out of his side. What an ignoble way to make an entrance, and just ew. This wasn't how she'd imagined their next meeting. Then again, nothing had gone the way she'd thought it would. But the view made up for that. Below, row upon row of tree-shaped containers of sparkling green magic lit up with scrolling glyphs. The strange sigils also crawled across the ground and dove under it, creating a network of symbols, the spell architecture animating the enchanted forests of Shayari. This must be how her twin saw the world. If only I had 1/10 of that power. But Sovvan didn't, and she'd better get back to flying before they crashed. Sovvan pumped her wings for all she was worth, sending gleaming feathers flying as she reached for him. "Give me your hand, brother." The word brother struck him momentarily dumb, then Sarn lunged for her. Their hands caught and held. His was fire-warm, like a brand as his hands should be since he was alive, and she wasn't. Was her hand cold to him? It must be because he shivered at her touch. Well, there was nothing she could do about that. Sovvan was just a ghost again. Sarn was curiously transparent except for his burning green eyes, and they were full of curiosity. His body must be elsewhere, and hopefully not in any immediate danger. If it was, Sovvan would never forgive herself. "You'd better be guarding his body, Miss Raya, since you're not guarding his soul." "How come I can hear you when I couldn't before?" Sarn asked. Oh God, he recognized her. What a relief. But he was staring at her expectantly. What the hell was she supposed to do now? Sovvan searched for words as his green eyes demanded an answer. They were transparent too. Because you're on my turf now. Sovvan blew a dark lock of hair out of her narrowing eyes. They weren't green like his, but gray like that damned place that had taken some of her memories. The rules are different when you're out of body, which is dangerous, by the way. You're a naked soul right now without the power to defend yourself. Where in blazes was all this insight coming from? Probably, it was bits of information she'd picked up over the last 14 years of her captivity, in the gray between. Someday, she'd reclaim all her lost memories of that time. Since what she'd just said sounded logical, Sovvan didn't retract it. That's why you're here. Sarn looked at her with suspicion though. Well no, the reason was a lot more complicated than that, but he didn't need to know that. But Sovvan nodded because he was waiting for an answer, then wished she hadn't when that movement interfered with her attempts to steer. Those treetops were mighty close to them. Could they harm him? I'd better pull up just in case. Sovvan attempted to gain altitude. Just don't make a habit out of this. Sarn frowned as if he was trying to remember something, then his eyes brightened and his face cleared. He touched his pendant with his free hand and said the one thing she hadn't expected. Sovvan. Her face lit up, suffusing her with pleasure. It was wonderful to hear her name on his lips, even if it was only this once. You remember my name? I knew you would. We're twins after all. Of course I'm the talkative one and the oldest. Sovvan held up a finger. By 1 hour, but it still counts. And she was getting sidetracked from her mission. She had to stay focused on it, but it was hard. That shadowy man seemed so far away now, and not nearly as important as reconnecting with her twin. But his next question knocked all thoughts of that right out of her mind. Why do you have wings? Sarn watched her with suspicious eyes that glowed a vibrant green. Was his magic watching her too? Sovvan grinned. She couldn't help it. God, it was so like the old days when they were kids. Don't worry. You won't grow a pair. I made a deal to get these. She swept her free hand backward, indicating her supersized dove wings. Though deal might be the wrong word for what had happened. Her wings were an unintended side effect of that deal, but he didn't need to know that. What deal? Sarn frowned at her. Touchy. Okay, no mentioning deals around him. She'd have to find out why later. Though Sovvan had a feeling the link between them was one reason. Promises had forged the bond between them, and it was glowing white-hot and getting hotter the longer they talked. Was that link how she was talking to him? Had she used it to rip his soul out of his body? What the heck was he doing when she'd started pulling? Hopefully, nothing dangerous. I'll tell you another time. I've waited almost 14 years for this moment. Before it slips away, I need to say a few things. Sovvan glanced over her shoulder. We don't have much time. I'm borrowing your magic to manifest, so the longer we talk, the more I'll drain you. Let's keep this short and sweet, okay? I don't want to tax you any more than necessary. Because he was looking mighty taxed already. Sarn winced at that truism. His face was wan and taking on a grayish cast. Even his green eyes were dimming as the fires within them banked or were borrowed by her. Sovvan remembered draining him in the past, and that was when they were children. Now that drain must be even stronger. She felt something tugging her away, but she ignored that sensation for now, and concentrated on their conversation. Nehemiah Riskin, someone whispered inside her mind. What the hell was that? Before Sovvan could ask, Sarn jerked his hand from her grip and plummeted toward the forest below. No. Sovvan swooped down and recaptured his arm. What the hell was that all about? Before she could ask, he thrashed in a vain attempt to free himself. But she had a good grip on him now. He wasn't going anywhere. Let go of me. I must stop him. Sarn gestured with his free hand to the dark thing, wrapped around his ankle. It was the same substance that had made up that faceless man's flowing robes. So, he was after her brother. She'd been right about that, but that was cold comfort. Sovvan shook her head. No matter how hard she beat her wings, she could no longer slow his slide toward the darkness pulling on him. I won't lose you again. But she was losing him. His hand was sliding through her fingers, and she couldn't recapture him this time. Life and death were dividing them again. Sovvan dropped her voice to a whisper. Listen to me. It's not your fault I died. You couldn't help being who and what you were, and neither could I. Unfortunately, I was allergic to magic. Was she still? Sovvan didn't know, but she was draining him, so maybe he was allergic to her? How could you be allergic to magic? Sarn stared at her. His eyes were graying out like hers. Sovvan was leeching all the color and magic from him. She had to let him go, but she couldn't. Not yet. There were so many things she needed to tell him. Many people are. Magic is a sliding scale. Mages on one end, nulls on the other. You were a null, weren't you? If his eyes got any wider, they'd pop out of his skull. Sovvan nodded. Her hands were losing cohesion. Damn it. Had those agents of chaos turned on her? Were those clockwork roaches disassembling her again, so they could reassemble her at their pleasure somewhere else? I'm not your messenger. You don't decide where I go or what I do. Sovvan held on, and the dark tentacle pulled her brother down despite her efforts to stop his earthward slide. Yes, until death fixed that, her smile turned pained. 'Cause every bloody thing must balance. Grand, isn't it? Lord, she never expected to parrot Misraya, but that annoying angel was right. One of us had to die so the other could live, Sarn said slowly, following the logic she'd thrown out to its horrible conclusion. Sovvan nodded. That someone had been her, and she'd do it all over again if given a choice. Why you and not me? Sarn asked, and there was such pain in his voice. But Sovvan pointed in mute horror at a black smudge below. It was the faceless man. Her lips opened and closed, shaping a warning, but Sarn couldn't hear her. Sovvan wasn't even sure any words had left her lips as white light consumed her. No. She had to protect him. Sovvan plummeted. She was a fiery ball of hope, angling for a collision with her twin far below. Catch me, bro. Take me with you. I can protect you from that faceless man. At least I think I can. If she couldn't, she'd damned well go out trying. No one would ever hurt her brother, not on her watch. Where the hell are you, Misraya? My brother's in trouble. Do something. But that contrary guardian angel didn't come at her call. That was just like Misraya. Well, if she wouldn't help, then it was up to Sovvan. Sarn. Take me with you. She reached out through the link between them before the light dragged her off to somewhere else. Maybe he heard her. Or maybe it was a reflex action to reach out for her, his lost twin, who was now found again. Maybe he wasn't ready to let go of her either. Maybe he never would be. All thoughts of everything except him faded from her mind. Remember me. Sovvan, he called as he pulled her into him, and the two became one again. Take what power I have, if I have any at all. It's yours. I give it freely. Sovvan drifted in a place of pure magic, lost to everything except the white light cradling her. At least there was no pain here, only completion. Because she was never meant to exist as a separate entity. But she did exist. From a piece carved off another soul, she'd been made, and she'd grown into a unique entity. One that couldn't be subsumed for long. But for now, Sovvan rested content to be right where she was because he needed her strength, her unconquerable spirit, her support, and maybe a little of her snarky attitude too. Sarn had always been too serious. Chapter 8. Don't mess with the queen. Faye appeared somewhere in the enchanted forest that covered most of Shayari, but she didn't see its queen. Come out wherever you are. I know you're here. Faye wound around some truly mammoth trees in her search. They stood hundreds of feet tall, which made visibility a problem. Good thing, the entity she was looking for glowed. Where are you, Queenie? Faye propped her fists on her hips and considered her options. She could keep searching for Shayari's queen tree, or she could stand here and come up with another plan. Of course, she hadn't expected to need an alternative plan so soon, and that was the only reason she didn't have one. Ahead, a white beam cut through the gloom under the canopy. I'll bet that's just the creature I need to speak to. Faye lifted the hem of her white silk gown and trotted toward that light. She'd swapped out her sandals for white boots to match her dress, and added a small bag she'd slung over her shoulder for the few necessities a roving ex-goddess might need. Faye liked her gowns as much as the next woman, but she also liked to be prepared. Dead ahead, a woman's silhouette appeared in a white beam of light, and the queen of all trees bent forward to address someone Faye couldn't see. But Faye felt the ripples that person created in the future, and had to stop when a wave of dizziness passed through her. She touched her brow and the future changed, then changed again. It fluctuated between several possibilities, and each was darker than the other. That would never do. Aralor. Daughter of Io, seventh sister, seeker of truth, why risk your life and sanity on this quest? The queen of all trees asked in her "you don't mess with my forest" tone, and this Aralor person wisely didn't answer. Aralor, said the queen as she switched to a sing-song voice. Why should you carry it alone? It's such a burden. Faye was about to move closer so she could get a look at this Aralor person, but those dark futures dimmed in her mind. They weren't gone, but several less awful futures were now possible. Go, Queenie. They still weren't great options, but they were at least workable, and there was always a chance someone would do something to create a bright future for all, especially if a certain ex-goddess gave them a little nudge in the right direction. Faye grinned at the thought. Sometimes it was good to be a fate. So, who's this Aralor, and what did she do to piss you off? Faye asked, the beam of light gliding toward her. Maybe that sort of thing wowed the citizens of Shayari, but not Faye. The ex-goddess could turn herself into a column of flame if she wanted. The white sunbeam resolved into a gigantic tree when it was 50 paces away. She's one of your descendants. Faye fought the disgusted eye roll that misguided loon deserved. That woman wanted to destroy all magic. As if that were even possible. So, you were just talking to that seeker girl. I've half a mind to set her straight about a few things. Don't. She's too indoctrinated and too angry to listen to anything. The queen of all trees shifted on her shimmering silver roots, impatient to be off. Oh, really? That sounds like a challenge. I've never met a mind I couldn't change. Faye tapped her lips with her index finger, and her red nail might have lengthened into a miniature dragon's claw. But there were no mortals around to be offended by it. Don't. Not now, anyway. It's not worth the risk. The queen of all trees' attention shifted to someone else in her forest, and her glowing branches stilled as a listening quiet fell over the trees surrounding them. Perhaps she was talking to Sovvan's brother? Didn't Sarn wander around this forest with those rangers? What's my descendant up to now? I felt a seismic shift in the future while you baited her. Did she do what you suggested? Faye rounded a massive tree as she approached the 1,000-foot-tall white glowing tree that was the queen of Shayari. The giant tree didn't move or reply, but a woman in a white dress and glowing crown leaned around her silver trunk and she looked pissed. She was also Shayari's queen. Technically, Shayari had two queens, the giant glowing tree and the woman who'd fought for and founded the country that bore her name. The two entities were bound in some complicated magical way that neither would explain nor even answer questions about, and Faye had asked repeatedly on many occasions. Neither queen had any interest in politics nor in governing their country, not after the systematic murder of their champions, the guardians of Shayari in centuries past. If they had, then there wouldn't be an order of magic-hating clerics wandering around their enchanted forest. "Hello, Shayari. It's been a while." Faye gave the angry witch queen a respectful nod. "That woman." Shayari shook with rage as she clenched and unclenched her fists. "May I assume you're talking about my descendant, the Seeker?" "Yes," Shayari said between clenched teeth. "You know, if you appeared to your people more often, you could stamp out that order. Just a suggestion." Faye spread her hands. She didn't know how the Queen of all trees and her immortal co-queen could be so hands-off. Shayari considered that for a second, then shook her head. "We already tried that, and it didn't work. Your descendant is dead set against us. Worse still, she has a dangerous item. I made a deal with her to get her out of Mount Eredren and away from all the people living under it, before her recklessness brought the mountain down on them. But she still has it, and it'll do immeasurable harm if I don't get it away from her soon." "What item? What does she have?" Though there was only one answer, the one Faye dreaded with all her heart. "Black Lumiere. She has a black Lumiere crystal." Shayari, the woman, not the country, faded into a white beam, and so did the giant silver tree she leaned against. Neither queen said another word before they sped through the forest toward an inhuman shriek. Faye didn't follow them. She couldn't. Those two words kept repeating in her head like twin hammers of doom. Black Lumiere. She must be caught in a nightmare, because there weren't any black Lumiere crystals anymore. The mine had been sealed after the Lithirians had unearthed it. As Faye spun to face it, wings extruded from her back. Her dress strained to cover her as her body shifted into a half-dragon, half-human warrior, a state her children called Monster Mom mode. Claws grew out of her hands and feet as she flapped her dragon wings and flew high enough above the forest's green canopy to see Mount Eredren. The largest black Lumiere mine was in its bowels, but it was shut up tight by the queen, running to another emergency. How could Aralor have such a nefarious crystal? Unconsciously, Faye touched the scar on her thigh through the rent in her dress. A black Lumiere crystal had made it, and she'd been lucky it had only left a scar. Faye stared at Mount Eredren for a long time, then she shivered and turned away. That was when she noticed someone, her descendant with that vile crystal probably, had carved a path of destruction through the forest. Shayari's queens needed to attend to that, so they couldn't help Sovvan. "I wish you all the luck in the world dealing with that black Lumiere crystal. Go with God, my friends," Faye sent after the Queen of all trees. That was one fight Faye was happy to stay out of. She'd lost too much to that dark crystal in the past. Faye landed on the leaf mold and let the enormous trees screen her while she resumed her human form and attended to her malfunctioning wardrobe. It only took a few minutes to melt the fabric in a few strategic places, to create new seams, and ensure she was properly covered. I need to find Sovvan another ally. But who could she ask that wouldn't stress the balance too much? Faye flashed herself home. She'd make a pot of tea and consult the flames of the future again. Maybe there'd be some answers in there. She doubted it, but she still had to check just in case. The resurgence of black Lumiere crystals bothered her. How had that come to pass? She needed to do some digging to find out. Faye snapped her fingers and a flame engulfed her. When the flames faded, Faye stood on the flat roof of her desert home, and she wasn't alone. "Now what's wrong?" Phaedra sat cross-legged on a blanket, under an umbrella strategically placed to shade him. He'd swapped his sooty clothes for another pair of loose-fitting trousers and a tunic, and both were appropriate to this time and place. They weren't purchased in the future or made of fabrics that didn't exist yet. Maybe Phaedra had taken her last lecture to heart. There's a seeker of truth wandering around Shayari with a black Lumiere crystal. I want to know how she acquired one. Who mined it? And why didn't any of the spells placed on the mine prevent that? Faye pounded her fist on the balustrade. One blow per question. Why didn't any alarms sound? Do you think that's related to this other business with Sovvan? Phaedra uncapped a canteen and took a sip. His swirling red-orange eyes were thoughtful. He'd inherited them from her, along with his prophetic powers. Of course, hers made a mockery of his powers, but she was, as her children liked to claim, older than dirt, and he wasn't quite that old yet. 4,000 years was just a drop in the bucket of space-time. Yes, I do, and I don't like it, Faye said, and she didn't care if that came out as a low growl. The dragon inside her paced about restively. It didn't like inaction. Neither did she. She was a defender at heart. Faye paced. The roof was quite long, since she had a lot of people to house, so she had plenty of room to roam. But she didn't go far because her family was known for their keen vision, not their hearing. If the queen of all trees is busy chasing seekers and magic-stealing rocks, then she can't help Sovvan or her brother, and she hinted that he was in trouble too. That doesn't come as a surprise though, not after meeting his twin sister. What else is eating at you? Phaedra held his canteen out to her. No thanks. Phaedrina will make a fresh pot of chai in a bit. I'll just have some of that. I'm making chai? Phaedrina said from the shadows of the staircase, leading up to the roof. Yes, you are, and you'll set aside a cup for your mother if you know what's good for you. Don't I always? Phaedrina turned on the stairs and headed back inside to make that chai. Thank you, daughter, Faye called after her. Just don't growl at me when you claim that cup. I'm sorry about that. This situation is so frustrating. It makes me want to scream. Faye clenched her fists and attempted to push her dragon down, so it wasn't so near the surface. Phaedrina paused on the stairway. If I bring you some dates and bread with your chai, will you tell me what's vexing you? You should. The more minds the better, right? Phaedra leaned his head back and closed his eyes, but he didn't resume his meditation. Faye considered that, then shrugged. Why not talk this over with the eldest of her children? Quite a few of them were home now at her invitation, and just thinking about them living under her roof again made her dragon purr with delight. All right, make the chai and call your sibs, but only the older ones, none of my babies. By babies, she meant none of her children who were under 500 years old. Faye kept them close to her, but she did allow them some autonomy. Not so when Phaedra had been that young. He opened his mouth to argue for some of them to be included, but Faye just folded her arms. She wasn't having any of that. Her babies were staying out of this. I'm not losing any of them. Not one. They don't know how to protect themselves, not like you and Farah and Phelan. End of discussion. Faye resumed her pacing but stopped when she realized Phaedrina was still listening. What about me? Her daughter asked. You're still my baby. Faye couldn't see Phaedrina roll her eyes, but she knew her daughter had by the exasperated huff she let out. You're impossible, Mom. Phaedrina hurried down the last few steps and disappeared into their home. I love you too, dear. When you're 500 years old, we can reevaluate your status. Until then, you're my baby and I'll keep you safe. That last part left Faye's mouth as a roar. Her dragon was in full agreement. Ouch. Must you do that? Phaedra rubbed his ears. What else are you worried about? You never answered me. Faye sagged against the balustrade. The adversary. I know he's lurking around somewhere. I just can't see him and I don't like it. His body, which is in hell right now, hasn't moved a muscle in months, and I find that very suspicious. I could look for him. Don't you dare. I don't want him to even know you exist. That growl was back in her voice. Faye didn't push her dragon down this time. Phaedra raised both hands in defeat. Okay, I won't. Good. Faye held her hand out and conjured up a flame. Show me, Sovvan. The flame leaned away from her, but no image appeared in it. Damn. Sovvan was still hidden from her sight. Show me the queen of all trees, Faye commanded the flame. A silver glowing tree appeared in the fire, cradling a shivering, wizened tree half dead from exposure to a magic-stealing black lumiere crystal. The queen of all trees swung a glowing branch and her image vanished. Show me the seeker, Aralor. Nothing happened because that woman had a black lumiere crystal, and it blocked Faye's magic. What will you do? Phaedra leaned against the balustrade beside her and peered into the flame she held. Faye extinguished the fire. I will figure out what's going on, because unraveling that mystery might be the only way I can help Sovvan. Chapter 9. Not what I expected. Sovvan blinked at the trees surrounding her, but that didn't help her to figure out what had just happened, so she sat up. That didn't improve her view much. She was still surrounded by tall trees. Am I in the enchanted forest? Well, there were a lot of trees surrounding her, so maybe she was. Shayari was mostly forest. Sovvan hadn't spent any time in the enchanted forest before she died, because she'd lived in a city, so that didn't help her identify her location. Where's Sarn? He'll know where we are. He runs around the enchanted forest as part of his job. She scanned the surrounding area, but there was no sign of her twin. What the hell had just happened? He pulled me into him, didn't he? So where was he? Am I inside his mind? If so, then why was she alone inside his head? Sarn was quiet, but he'd always had a mind of his own and a strong will. He'd had to so he could control his magic. Where was he? Sovvan pushed to her feet and looked in the only direction she hadn't searched yet, directly above her. But Sarn wasn't leaping from branch to branch up there. Sovvan squinted at the leaves blowing in the wind hundreds of feet above her head. Were they red? A leaf spiraled down and landed at her feet. It was red and had 5 points, just as Sovvan knew it would. When she'd slammed into her brother, she'd somehow returned to the grove of memory. I'm not even going to ask why, because this probably has something to do with magic. And magic was her brother's domain, not hers. But since she was back here, Sovvan had a larger problem. Some dark force had ensnared her brother, and she had a sick feeling it was that laughing creep in black robes. And I'm not there to help him. Sovvan touched her chest. The link to her twin wasn't visible, but she closed her hand around the glowing chain that connected them. Hang on, bro. I'll figure this out, then come help you. I just don't know how long that will take. Sovvan hoped she was wrong about who had grabbed him. Will you defeat him too? Four squeezed between two trees and pointed her trunk at the red crowns of the memory trees. The memory-eating pachyderm didn't look happy to see her. You mean Malachiah? Yeah, I need to do something about him too. Sovvan just didn't know what. She wasn't a mage, and didn't know how to defeat him. Lightning streaked across the darkening sky and outlined her ex-guardian angel when it struck his back. His wings burned brighter. Was that good or bad? At least he still hovered over the grove. What are you doing? Are you powering up or casting some sort of spell on this place? Sovvan squinted up at him, but he didn't answer. He probably hadn't even heard her. I wish I could see what he was doing. But she couldn't because she wasn't a mage. Sovvan was the opposite of one when she was alive. I don't know what I am now. And no one was in a hurry to help her figure that out either. Sovvan pushed her hair out of her eyes, then stopped and stared at her hand as glowing bits drifted away from her fingers, revealing the crisscrossing ribbons of white light underneath. What's happening to my hand? You're dissolving. Four backed away from her, and there was fear in her liquid eyes. Why? I already did that. Sovvan looked from her hand to the retreating elephant in shock. This is the agents of chaos doing, isn't it? Four didn't reply. She kept backing up until she'd squeezed between two trees, putting them between her and Sovvan. What are you afraid of? I'm still me. Sovvan reached for that pachyderm with her dissolving hand, but Four turned and fled. Wait, Four. Sovvan rushed after that elephant, but Four vanished into the forest before Sovvan could catch her. Damn that Amnesian for ditching her. Sovvan kicked the red leaves underfoot, and they spiraled upward, joining the revolving ring of debris around Malachia. Each leaf was someone's memory. So far none were hers. Dark clouds gathered above Malachia, and they spun around him as more lightning bolts struck him. What are you doing? That was the problem. Sovvan had only conjecture at this point, and a feeling he wasn't conjuring anything good. I need to stop him, but my hands are fading away. I need to fix that first, or I won't be able to do anything. If Sovvan was right about the cause, then there was only one way to reverse that fading: the crabapple Faye had given her. It should cure whatever the agents of chaos had done to her. Where was that damned apple? Sovvan cast about for it. That apple must be here somewhere. Leaves crunched and the wind howled through the trees. Was Four coming to help her? Sovvan didn't turn to find out. She had to find that apple. Her hands were down to glowing bones, and even they were disintegrating now. She searched through the leaves blowing past her, until she saw something roll by in her peripheral vision. Gotcha. Sovvan spun and reached for that object with a skeletal hand. Her fingers solidified and flesh covered her bones, as she closed her hand around the apple Faye had given her. Give me the apple, hurry, her own voice said, startling her. Sovvan spun to face herself, but that creepy copy was thin and stretched like an image might be. She circled it warily and nodded at what she saw. It was a two-dimensional projection, not a real copy of her. Thank God. What are you? Maybe she should back away from it, just in case this projection hid something dangerous from view. Sovvan squeezed the apple as she backed away. She wasn't retreating, just repositioning. Give me the apple. The copy of her held out a hand for it. I don't think so. Faye gave it to me. I don't know what you are, but you're not me, and I'm not giving you this. Sovvan bit into it and almost gagged. It was so tart. I thought creation would taste better than this. Ick. But she choked it down and took another bite, and her doppelganger shimmered, then faded away, leaving 33 clockwork insects behind. Each one had a glowing tube attached to their rears that had somehow created the illusion of her. But why had they done that? Who were they trying to fool? Not me. I knew the moment I saw that copy, it wasn't me. I'm pretty unique after all. Why had those creatures wanted the apple? Sovvan took another bite of it. She'd better consumed it before those agents of chaos tried to take it from her. After 4 more bites, Sovvan was down to the core. Was she supposed to eat that too? Sovvan regarded the pit-studded thing warily. The crabapple was supposedly packed with power, but Sovvan didn't feel any different after consuming it. Nor did she feel right about leaving that core lying around. She could bury it, but the agents of chaos could just dig it up. No, that wasn't a viable solution. Then what was? I need to ask Faye what to do with it. But how could she do that? Sovvan didn't have a link to that former goddess, nor did she know how to reach her. But there was someone she could ask. Miss Raya? I know you can hear me. You hear everything I send through the link to my brother, and you block most of it. Sovvan laid the hand not holding the apple core on her chest. But there was no response from that contrary angel. The agents of chaos came out of their stupor as she tapped her link and tried again to rouse that annoying angel. Come on. I know you're there. Stop ignoring me. Sovvan backed away from the clockwork roaches scuttling toward her. They were small, but they'd already messed with her enough. She wouldn't give them any more opportunities for mischief. Whose side are you on? Why did you take me away from here and send me after that shadow man? The agents of chaos didn't answer unless the clicking of their gears counted. They disappeared into a pile of leaves. Sovvan, Sarn said, and her name shot across the link between them. Somehow, he'd gotten past his guardian angel long enough to call her. I'm here. Are you all right? Sarn? Sovvan spun and searched for her brother, even though she knew Sarn wasn't here. He was in the mortal world, and she was in some sort of pocket realm with no idea how to get back to any place she recognized. The leaves shivered to her left as hundreds of agents of chaos rushed toward her, and the surrounding air rippled like the water in the drop of eternity. A distorted image of her brother appeared in it. He was clad in the same green uniform he'd worn both times she'd encountered him. But he wasn't in the enchanted forest anymore. He stood in a tunnel and stared at something, transfixed by what he saw. Sarn held a small child in his arms, who wore a cut-down version of his uniform, but the child was looking away. Sovvan reached out for them, then checked that movement. This must be a trap. The agents of chaos weren't her allies. Why are you showing me this? They couldn't want her to help her brother, because that didn't benefit them in any way she could see. What do you want? Go, the agents of chaos said in unison. Go to them. Is that a portal? The image of her twin and his son rippled as she stared at it. Sovvan yearned to cross over and help them, but she couldn't trust the agents of chaos. Go to them. Why did they want her to follow her heart's desire and leave this place? Didn't they want her to stop Malachiah? But her ex-guardian angel didn't seem so important, nor did his schemes, not when she could go through that portal. Who knew the agents of chaos could create such a thing? Sovvan closed the distance between them, unable to do anything else. Her family was so close, and she could help them. The link between her and her twin glowed as bright as the sun as it shortened, pulling her through that portal. Sovvan fell across its threshold and the world vanished, replaced by blackness dotted with stars. Then she was falling, and Sarn was calling her name. I'm coming, bro. Catch me if you can. Because the idea of crash landing didn't appeal to Sovvan. But she needn't have worried, because the world went white as she plummeted with increasing speed. Chapter 10. I'm not brave. 4 stopped running long enough to check her back trail. She didn't see Sovvan. Good. She'd escaped that strange girl, but now what? Lightning struck Malachiah again, powering him up, or the spell he was working. She couldn't tell which it was. 4 shuddered. The air felt electric with tension as those thunderheads charged up another bolt to strike Malachiah. How could she possibly fight that? The wind gusted hard enough to make the giant trees around her sway, but it couldn't move her. 4 planted her feet and stood firm against the gusting wind. If only she dared stand up to Malachiah, but he was beyond her ability to harm. Her memory-eating breath wouldn't affect him. His angelic nature protected him from that, even though he'd fallen to the dark side, and that was her only weapon. Sovvan had made common cause with the agents of chaos, that traitor, so there was no one left to fight that girl's ex-guardian angel. Four's shoulders slumped and her trunk grazed the leaf-covered ground. This was her people's most sacred space, and she had no way to defend it from whatever Malachiah was doing. I'm sorry I can't save you. I'm sorry I brought Sovvan here. I'm sorry for all of it. Four touched the bole of a memory tree with her trunk. Would it survive what that ex-angel was doing? Or would all the knowledge collected here be lost forever? Don't be sorry. Do something to stop this, said a small voice from above. It was one of the creatures that tended the trees, but Four couldn't see who because they didn't want to be seen, and that was a wise choice given the insanity of the last few hours. Four shook her head. There's nothing I can do against a fallen angel. He's stronger and more powerful than me. So, find another way. Everyone has a weakness. Find his. How? Four flicked her ears restively. You're standing in the heart of a living library, and you're asking me that? The caretaker laughed. It's not funny. Four scanned the branches above her for the creature, who was enjoying her predicament so thoroughly. Sorry. The irony of the situation got the better of me. A small shadow moved on a branch above, but she couldn't tell whose shadow it was. If you have a suggestion, then tell me. Four stamped her foot. Why don't you ask the memory trees? Fallen angels have been around for a long time, and plenty of creatures have clashed with them over the years. That wasn't a bad idea. She should have thought of that. Then again, Four usually came to this grove to deposit memories, not to consult them. I can just ask them that. You can ask them anything. The creature didn't say, that's what they're there for, but its tone implied that. Four didn't reply. Another bolt struck Malachiah, outlining him in a purple-white glow for a moment, and she shuddered at the sight. Thank God, he hovered high enough above her that there was a canopy of red leaves screening her from view. The sooner you ask, the sooner you'll receive an answer, the caretaker creature said, but its reminder prodded her into action. Not all creatures need to be brave, Four reminded that creature. She didn't. Her function hadn't called for heroics of any kind before now. As she ran her trunk across the bark of a memory tree, Four felt a tingling sensation as a connection formed. I'm not here to make a deposit. I need answers. I need to know how to defeat a fallen angel. Four waited for a response after she sent her thoughts to the tree. Query accepted. Search initiated. Please wait, said the memory tree in her head. It had a wry mind voice. Maybe it was also enjoying her situation. How long do you need to find an answer? Four didn't know how long she had before Malachiah completed the spell he was working on, and no idea what that spell would do once it was active. Unknown. Searching. Please wait. That was the only answer she received. How long will this take? Four peered up into the canopy above, but that odd-shaped shadow was gone. Hello? Are you still there? It takes as long as it takes. There are no shortcuts, was the impatient reply, but her interlocutor sounded far away. Was the creature leaving? Where are you going? Four searched the canopy for any sign of movement independent of the wind, which was still gusting. Back to work. Someone's got to preserve all these memories you dump in here. Wait. But that creature didn't. Don't leave me alone. But she wasn't alone, Four realized. There was an angel assigned to guard this place. She was a tough angel and fearless too. Where was that red-haired angel? Four touched the tree again with her trunk and waited for a connection to form. Do I need to stay here to receive the answer to my query, or do I just need to stay in your grove? The tree didn't answer at first. Maybe it didn't know, or maybe it could only answer one question at a time, Your query is still processing. Do you wish to initiate a new search? 4 shook her head, then realized the tree couldn't see that because it didn't have eyes. No, keep searching for the answer to my original query. The wind rustled the branches overhead. Would that affect the search in progress? 4 didn't ask, and the tree didn't say anything else. Nor did 4 leave it. She needed the answer to her query, and standing here, she was safe for now. Until she had an answer, staying put seemed like the most prudent course of action. I'm not a hero, and I don't want to be. Forget that query. There were enough heroes. Let one of them step up. 4 scanned the canopy for any sign of that tough angel. Though really, this was Sovvan's problem. That girl should come back and deal with it. But there was no sign of her either. 4 was alone with the trees, and a fallen angel who was magicking up something bad. It was time to go while she still could. 4 turned her back on him and drew a large circle. Inside it, she traced 143 circles, then breathed her memory magic on them, lighting them up. As white light shot upward, it formed a doorway back to the gray between, but 4 hesitated at its threshold. Maybe she should find Rachiel before she left, and let that angel know she was on her own. 4 wasn't brave, but she didn't feel right about leaving that wounded angel alone either. She gave the portal one last glance, then padded away to search for the angel Rachiel.